All right.
It says we're live, but then it says I'm on my channel. If you go to my channel, can you see the broadcast?
I'm taking a look here. Yep,
You can?
I can,
Okay, so we're live. I'm going to try.
I think.
Send out this link.
Yep. Yep.
Okay,
There's
we are
people.
live.
People in the chat, if you are
Hello.
there, can you send us a chat message just to say hi? I want to see if the chat comments are going to pull through to the StreamYard software.
I just sent out a link for the live show.
Perfect. Oh, it's so weird watching myself. Like there's a weird delay on your channel, right? Aha. Andy, thank you. Heidi, hello. Yay. Okay, so the chat is pulling in. Chris, can you see that in our comment section?
Oh,
Hey, P.
we're gonna give people like a couple minutes to make sure that everyone's joining.
Yeah, like Chris and I have been testing this for like half an hour, and literally before we went live, my camera stopped working. Hey, Amy. Oh yeah, do share your names. That was like one of the highlights of this month for me.
It really was. I'm 25 coffee cup because my name ended up being like the number of science fiction and fantasy books I read last year, which I totally estimated. And
I
then
counted.
divided by, you counted? Oh, you're a good little
I
cookie.
had a spreadsheet.
Which I estimated and then divided by, you got to divide that by 2.
By 2, yeah.
And then it was like my favorite like household kitchen tool or something like that, which
Oh, coffee cups for sure.
coffee cups.
Mine's that really like I don't know if anybody has done True Colors, like that like personality business kind of thing. It's like tells you like what kind of person you are in the workforce, and I am the most gold, and like everything I have is gold. It's like a thing for me. I'm like I couldn't pick anything but gold.
We had to do, I don't know if we did that. We had to do this one that was like it's called a disc assessment where it's
Oh
like,
yeah, I've done disc as well. Yeah.
and I like always picture myself in real life as like a very nice, warm, open person.
You're a Hufflepuff?
Yeah. Uh, and then my disc assessment came out like totally D, which is like domineering, like horrible human being.
Oh
You're
no.
yeah, you're a jerk. And I was like, whoa, this is like not how I see myself.
Oh jeez. Hey Joe. I always
Hello.
get the like super I like to think of them in like Star Trek terms. Like I am super Vulcan, like super logical, like no emotional decision making.
Yeah. uh, okay.
Amazing.
Give people just a couple more minutes. Make sure, because
Yeah.
I know the link I put in the Discord. Make sure people saw that. And we'll get talking about our
About the book.
which
I know I have oh geez,
it's
I'm
not
like
showing up very well.
hang on, I got all the lights on. Look at that glare though. I wish I sort of want to buy myself a copy of all of these books, like almost as like mementos, but I'm also like, why wouldn't I just get them from the library? I don't know, man. Hey Sarah.
Hello. Okay.
You want to just get going, Chris?
You want to get going? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll just start off with kind of like a basic plot summary, and then we'll kind of get into the points that we want to discuss about the book. So, Memory Called Empire follows the perspective of a woman named Mahit Desmari, who is a diplomat from Lisel Station, which is the station that doesn't have a home planet. And even though they exist in Takes Kalanli space, they are not like under the jurisdiction of Takes Kalan, and they've not been like subsumed by the Empire yet. She is sent to Takes Kalan, which is a planet with vast expansionary goals to replace the previous ambassador from Lascelles Station to Takes Kalan. Um, when Takes Kalan demands a new ambassador, they are not told why. They don't know whether or not the old ambassador is dead. And she goes to Takes Kalan with an outdated Imago machine. So an Imago machine is something that's placed in the cerebellum. Is that correct?
I think so. Like in the spinal cord somewhere
Yeah.
is how I envisioned it.
To keep alive like generational memory. So when somebody dies, that machine is removed, it has recorded their memories and their like biochemical reactions to things, and then it's put into like their replacement, or how would you describe that? Maybe like their inheritor of that Imago machine.
Yeah, it's like an application process. This is like
Exactly.
so Star Trek for me. Like I can't separate the two in my head.
Yeah. Oh, Andy was just saying that he had to get the library book yesterday, so he has to jump off. Oh, that's fine, Andy. I hope you
Bye,
enjoyed the book.
Andy. Good luck.
Good luck. um, so yeah, she goes to Lissell Station with an outdated Imago machine and discovers that her predecessor has died. And this kind of just sucks her into a massive political intrigue because it turns out that her predecessor has not been making regular reports back to Lissell Station, so nobody knows exactly what he's been up to. His Imago machine that is in her cerebellum is 15 years out of date, and it turns out that he was probably involved in some political machinations involving the succession of the empire of Takes Kalan.
Which we don't
Um,
find out about until like much later. Like
yeah.
we know he's like close to the throne, but we don't really like I'm surprised, sorry, I'm jumping in totally here, but
Go, go,
I'm
go, go.
surprised how much of a mystery this is, really. Like for a sci-fi pick, this felt very like peripherally sci-fi other than the Imago.
Yeah, it
Really.
had like political thriller
Yeah.
meets science
Yeah.
fiction in a lot of ways.
Mhm. Yeah.
And so, yeah, basically, it's her trying to uncover what exactly her predecessor was up to, what is going on with this line of succession, and also the fact that it turns out that it might be likely that her Imago machine fails when it sees the dead body of the predecessor, and it turns out that that failure might also be the result of sabotage from her own people back at Lissell Station. So, what exactly is going on? So, that's kind of like a spoiler-free
The
summary
spoiler-free
of the plot.
intro. I think we're definitely going to get into spoilers as we go. Like it would be nice to avoid them a little bit, but I'm not sure how many people in chat have actually not read it yet, or maybe not finished
Yeah.
it. I'm not sure, but I think we should sort of assume that they have finished it. I think like I recognize a lot of people from Discord that have been posting kind of through to the end of the book. So yeah, I was surprised a little bit. Hey, Ron.
Hey, Ron.
Hey, Elise. I'm surprised a little bit by how little science fiction there really felt in the book.
Yeah.
And I was saying to Chris the other day, like, I was like, I don't understand anything about like the science fiction aspects of this world. Like, I get that we're on a planet that is also a single city, and we have the Imago, which like seems very clearly understandable. Like, we had a couple of questions in Discord, I think, early on about how exactly, like, whose memories they got and how was that process like managed. But beyond that, I didn't feel like there was a lot of like classic sci-fi. And right before we went on here, I went back and read the prologue of the book, which actually is like chocked full of information. It talks about like how many star systems they control, how like they have jump gates and they have like sublight travel. And I was like, oh, right, this is like a shorthand for like the sci-fi elements, but we really like Mahit gets to our city like chapter 1, right? And we never leave. It feels like a very concentrated thing. Like we have this whole like massive planet to explore, but I don't know how far we ever actually travel, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like it's not really discussed how far they're going.
Yeah, there's a lot about the mechanics that are kind of left loosey goosey, and it is
That I
very
would expect in a sci-fi specifically.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's funny because I reread the prologue too after you mentioned that to me. And you're right, it's chock full of information, but like that
Yeah.
information never seems to become important again. Like
No.
I don't know. I mean, like the jump gates kind of become important a little bit later on, but like not to the extent as I was expecting.
Yeah, exactly. I think Elise, like that's kind of what I was thinking about too. Like what about so because this book club is set up to like explore specific genres, I feel like we'd be remiss to talk about the book and not talk about like how it's representative of a sci-fi genre. And I think like that's totally right. Futuristic setting to talk about modern problems or almost to talk about historical problems. Like Mahit, the author has a huge background in history. She's like up to a PhD in like various aspects of history. And you can feel her pulling a lot of what she knows about empire and kind of using a bunch of them to Frankenstein together what her like Takes Kalani empire is going to be. But beyond the Imago, I don't feel like this had to be set in space, right? We could have done a near future Earth setting with the same Imago tech, but like it could have just been on Earth. and it would have had the same kind of, like, you could almost done like a historical, like steampunky kind of thing where we have a land-based empire expanding. And like there's so many examples of that from history.
Yeah. Uh, Amy brought up that there was the sci-fi aspects of the city itself, including the
Yeah.
algorithm, which is interesting, and then the sunlit as well, which
Yeah.
are almost like, I mean, they're human beings, but they seem to be operating on an algorithm. So in a lot of ways, they kind of feel like AIs, even though
Hmm.
they're not AIs. You know what I'm trying to say?
When she talks, so I found a couple of articles just this morning that I was reading through, and one of them talks about how she has set up this planet to be a single city and how that would be like nearly ungovernable and how you have to have that AI to run everything. But of course, the AI we see in the book, like the AI can target and the Sunlit can target outsiders, like any barbarian to the Empire. And she makes the point that like all of the algorithms that are like making this thing go are still written by humans. So all the prejudices that the people of the planet have, and certainly we can get into kind of that outsider status, and I think there's a lot of like historical connections there, but all of that prejudice is still built into the technology that powers their world, and they don't do as much hands-on management, but they've set up all the systems to do the management, right? So that was really interesting.
Yeah, and Elise brought up that the new threat hinted at is also pretty like sci-fi feeling, which
Yeah.
I was so intrigued by that threat when I like opened the book and like they talked in the
Mhm.
very prologue about the fact that these ships have been disappearing into the blackness,
Which I forgot about. Like,
and
does
you
anybody
never.
else just like read the prologue and be like, "Oh, this isn't the real story yet," and by the end of the book you've forgotten the prologue? Because I do
All
that
the
apparently.
time.
Yeah.
Except for that fact, that did stick out in my brain quite a bit as I was reading. And then, like, it becomes important by the very end, but you never learn what exactly that thing is,
No. And
which is an
again,
obvious setup for the sequel. But
I was going to say in one of the articles, I will link all of these. There were three that I was looking at specifically, and I think it was an NPR interview with her, and she talks about, yeah, she's answering a question about like more stories, and the direct sequel is titled whatever, and the book itself is about war. A lot of it happens on a Tex-Kalani battleship. There's interstellar mail fraud and a kitten, and maybe
oh,
genocide.
I'll take all that.
Right? And a usual dose of political machination. And she says she was inspired by the horror of apocalyptic violence, which happened between Cortez and Montezuma, for what that's worth. So I think we kind of get a sense that, like, some of the things that I think we felt in the Discord were lacking in this book, I think we're going to get more of, because at the end of the book, we end with Mahit going back to her home. And I think a lot of us felt like we didn't really know much about her. The book takes place in a really short period of time,
I mean, it's like I
like a
didn't count.
week or two.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I
2 weeks maximum.
and that's really hard to do, like the character development. And I sort of want to give a pass on that. Like it's something I definitely read for. I like to prioritize books. Like people are excited about the cats. I just
I
saw
know.
that. She said a kitten or a multitude of kittens is what she said in that interview. So like that'll be exciting. Um, but yeah, like I feel like there wasn't, if she had done this massive amount of character development, she's either got to do flashbacks or it wouldn't really be believable. Like we don't spend enough time with Mahit to really know her as a person. And I think I had mentioned in the Discord that I thought that we had sacrificed kind of that character development for shorthand world building in a lot of ways.
Yeah. So yeah, we can kind of talk a little bit more about the world building too, because I think that the world building for me, as far as like how effectively it was done, was kind
Mhm.
of inconsistent. Because there are parts
Yeah.
of the world building that I thought were like really slick.
Yeah.
So,
Me too.
for example, and towards the beginning, when she first gets her like mail, she learns that there's kind of like this diplomatic crisis that's arisen because of paperwork, where a man, got married, and he changed his last name when he got married, but of course, it didn't transfer over in all the paperwork, and so he became difficult to find, and it became this like diplomatic crisis that she never really solves, but it was like given to
No.
her.
Yeah.
Um, and I loved that because it was just like such a interesting way to like just put into the plot like, hey, this is a world where men might change their name when they get married.
Yeah.
And whether that means that it's like there's queer marriages or whether that means that it's just a world where that's expected. Like it just kind of throws in this like extra like something different from our own world,
Yeah.
just like really easily into the plot. But then I think overall I found some of the way the world building was done kind of clunky
Yeah.
because the Imigo machine fails right when she gets there.
Mhm.
And I just felt like she had to do that in order to be able to have that kind of classic character who's an outsider and has to be explained things to. And
Yeah.
that when it makes sense to have a diplomat be that way, because he or she should have been trained. But if the Amigo machine fails, then we can make this ignorant character that has to be explained things to. And
And I
it
kind of,
ran into the same problems that you see when that trope is used.
yeah, and I just felt like I think we all, so it's funny watching like the book club as a whole kind of move through segments of the book, because I think we all read the prologue and we're like, oh, this is going to be a book about like empire, imperial expansion, colonialism. We're going to have a lot of stuff to talk about there. And then that never really gets carried through, I would say, in a really effective way through the book. But we all also really liked, what was his name? Iskander as a character. And I think we all were kind of saying, like, we wish he would come back. And I think there's a way you could have done that where he's like really short with her. He really doesn't have the patience to explain things to her. And even though he's in her head all the time, maybe she still has to figure a lot of this out. Like, I think it could have been done a little bit different.
Yeah, I agree.
Just going to get caught up on the chat.
Yeah, that's fire, guys. Keep it coming.
Yeah, Elise, I think the same thing. Like, I think there were a lot of, like Chris was saying, there's like small moments that really feel like a lot of world building. But when I look back on the book as a whole, I realize actually it's like a flaw of the book and also something really clever where a single sentence can tell us a ton about the world, but it kind of like saves the author from having to spend time actually developing it.
Mm-hmm.
Like that shorthand. And I think that shorthand is something else I thought about a lot in terms of science fiction, where I don't know, like there's certain tropes of the genre or there's certain like technologies that are common in science fiction that if the author says they're using, I don't know, some like warp equivalent technology, or they're using a like a wormhole or something, like I know exactly what that looks like. I don't need a fully drawn picture because in my brain, I've shorthanded into what that is already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I completely agree. I'm going to bring up comments here as we go along, if that's okay. So I just want to see if I know how to get this feature up. Yeah, okay, we got Heidi's coming up. So Heidi says, even without the Imoga machine, she was supposed to have been very prepared. So this is something that bothered me as well as I was reading the book, was I just found it so difficult to believe that somebody had supposedly been trained, gone to school for, I mean, she went to like a quote-unquote university, I can't remember what they called it exactly, for diplomacy, had been tested for her acuity for it, and then just like didn't know what the hell was going on this planet, you know, and trying
She's
to
got the razzle dazzle, right? She's got that classic scene where she's coming into the city, and it reminded me so much of a whole bunch of different people who, like from history, who would go to Constantinople for the first time, and they would get into like the Horn of Hattin, and they'd see the city, and they'd see the city walls, and they would just be like overwhelmed by the city. And like we see it, and we talked about it in the Discord, like she is sucked into this culture. She's been a fan of the culture, even recognizing how terrible it, you know, what threat it poses to her people, and also all the terrible things they've already done. Like that was a huge theme of the book. And she just kind of gets like, it's like she forgets half her training.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But reading more comments, sorry.
Yeah, me too.
Trying to keep up the discussion in the comments.
Oh, Amy Lynn saying, I just couldn't picture the world, so I had trouble keeping interested. I ended up not finishing. Yeah, I could see that happening.
It's hard to see in your mind.
Yeah, and again, I wonder if that's something that your brain fills in its own gaps, right? So when I say, oh, the world building was great, like, okay, so how much of it was actually built properly in the book versus how much am I filling in with a bunch of other like sci-fi imagery I already have? Because I watch a lot of sci-fi. I read enough of it that I have kind of that shorthand, and I'm just like dumping in preset, like, oh, it's a great world building thing, when really
isn't always a problem for me what you're describing, because like I always love Lois McMaster Bujold's definition of a genre, which is she calls it a group of books in close conversation with each other.
Yeah.
So if it is relying on that like previous knowledge, I'm not totally against that, but I think even with trying to rely on some of that previous knowledge as shorthand, the world building had a few like holes in it that were just difficult to ignore.
Yeah, Sabrina kind of mentioned that, like she's saying the author's very good at setting the scene in the moment and providing like the pertinent details to flesh out a scene, but she forgets about everything else happening outside of that scene. I think that's exactly what I'm thinking of. Like, I didn't feel like any particular scene I couldn't imagine or whatever, but I really had no concept of like what the rest of the world was like.
Yeah.
We're following a diplomat. She has certain access that is required of the story. And there's certain places it's logical for her to go, but like we don't have time for her to take like a sightseeing trip to one of the nature preserves that is apparently on the planet. Like, we get very concentrated world building. And she said in that interview that she wants to write a whole bunch of stories, not a series particularly, but a bunch of stories in that world. And I would hope that we get a lot more of it because it's interesting. I just feel like I know this piece and like nothing else.
Yeah, I completely agree. And it was also difficult for me to imagine what daily life for just regular people on Texacolon looked like. You know what I'm trying to say? You get pretty detailed about the subway system. You know, there's restaurants, but really I didn't quite understand exactly how most of these people were living. So later on in the book, you do kind of get this new sight into where 12 Azalea is living, which I did find interesting.
Yeah.
Because he kind of lives in a poorer section
Mhm.
of the city. And it didn't go into much detail though. You got this idea that there clearly was this class difference that was being put on display, but it really didn't go into much detail about what those people's daily life was like, what the grind is like on this city. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and again, I wonder how much of that is just the time compression of the story. Like this book is one of the plottiest books I have read in quite a while because I typically would pick a character-driven or a setting-driven story. And this book, I think it has the potential to do a lot, right? I think this could be a setting-driven series or, kind of universe that she's creating, and that would be amazing. And clearly there's a lot of room for character development. I think we all kind of, talking about 12 Azalea, I think we all kind of got on with him quite well, and there's lots to do there. He was the comic relief, and he was the person that, I don't know, just felt chill about everything and approachable in a way that we have so much focused on language and poetry, which there's a couple comments in the chat, the language in the book. She obviously loves poetry. Yeah, I agree. We are so focused on the language and the poetry element. Again, also I think being a shorthand for world building. And it's funny in a science fiction book, I think of Empire kind of in there's a domination version. I play Civilization on my computer. So this is where that comes from. But there's domination civs, there's cultural civs, there's science civs. And I think about, we're reading a science fiction book, but our dominant theme here is culture, right? And they talk about outsiders and insiders very specifically about their cultural understanding of the empire, which is, I think, really interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and everyone outside is considered barbarian. And there's even something that was kind of interesting was that they were talking about how Mahit was human in their eyes, but kind of just barely.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really interesting. And I wanted to know more about this world. Who would classify to them as being completely not human, not even being in that barely section? Are there aliens that are actually physically non-humans, or is this just
I think that's what we're set up for.
Or is this just shorthand for extreme xenophobia?
And I think that's the case. I think the use of the term barbarian specifically is a specific historical callback to when it was anybody who didn't speak Greek, right? That's where the word comes from, right? So I think that choice of words, not outsider, really, it's specifically barbarian. I think that's a really specific thing because we're in a language-based cultural civilization, and the Greeks would have viewed themselves as a lot of the things that the Texcolani would be, center of the world, the height of culture. Everybody else is beneath them. And that's an interesting thing. How would the Greeks have viewed the Mongols, people on the steppe? Would that have been the same kind of how human are they kind of thing? So I think we're going to get aliens in book 2. I feel like that's what we're set up for, but considering how many star systems they control. Yeah.
And Ron says, I think a trillion is mentioned at one point. I don't remember that, but it probably was. My memory's not great.
Yeah, I think, Ron, there's a couple details I missed too. Just generally, having gone back and reread that prologue, I was like, oh, geez. Yeah. I remember, Chris, we were both saying oh, maybe read this book twice before we get to the live show. Dude, I barely made it through once. I want to scroll back up here. Amy also said, I think the use of non-Texcolani citizens to be treated as barbarians also adds to that everyone feels the need to explain everything to Mahit feeling of the book. And I think that's super true. We see that with 3 Seagrass a couple of times. And it verges on the annoyance with Mahit but they seem to not really understand how much she knows or doesn't know, and so they assume she knows nothing. She's not given kind of the benefit of the doubt with any of that. And Amy also said just later on, I wonder how much of the diplomatic training is based around the assumption that the ambassador will have an imago. That's a really interesting point, and I think a lot of it, right?
Yeah, there was another someone, because Amy said again, obviously, obviously that would be an ideal situation if the imago fails like Mahit's did, but given how ingrained the imago is in the cell culture, it's possible that their training relies on the imago knowledge. So yeah, I think that's. Oh, sorry, I dropped something. I think that's I think that's also what's going on as well, but it's interesting. But it's also, I think, like, that would have been more impactful for me if, like Sabrina mentioned, if we got to know more about LaSalle itself.
Yep.
You know what I'm trying to say, and like why their culture would have relied on that. Like, obviously, it's a planet. It's not tied to a planet, so it doesn't have the resources of a planet. And so they're trying to preserve everything, including the memories.
This is like their one thing. I'm trying to think of an example in history that's the same, but like this LaSalle station is like their thing is this technology that they have that is supposed to be a bit of a state secret that apparently has been told to Six Direction, which, can I just say, I found an article. I was telling Chris that I keep thinking of One Direction, and I found an article where the guy interviewing the author was like, I keep misreading it as One Direction. I'm like, he's like the lost Beatle of One Direction or something. I couldn't not think of that. But you know, like I feel like they're this. The station, I think I saw somewhere, the population's what, like 30,000. Like I think I saw that somewhere. I don't think I'm making that up. But it's real small, and it feels like they have this one thing to protect that, like, is kind of how they do everything. They've put all of their eggs into that basket. And they're I guess part of like a mining. Their system does a lot of mining and whatever. And I think there's a lot of stations spread out. But
mining, I think.
Yeah, but I would really like to know more about where she comes from. And
I think we're going to get a lot more of that in the sequel.
I hope so.
January, which I do want to read the sequel. Like, I feel like I'm being really critical in this, but I liked the story in general, and I liked the writing.
Me too.
So I want to continue on.
We were saying that before. Like, Chris and I did a test on Friday night, just of like StreamYard and like getting used to stuff, and we were saying how much reading a book for book club, knowing we're going to discuss it like in Discord and now here, opens the book up to way more criticism than I would typically like dump on a book if I was filming like a wrap up for my channel or something, right? Like, you spend more time kind of picking it apart.
Yeah. Do we want to kind of get into the politics? Because this is where I got really confused as a reader, if I'm being honest. So
sorry,
you're still reading comments?
I'm reading the comments. The four-legged species that Mahit mimic their bow. Did I have an ibuprofen? Either that or they were both. Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Sorry, Chris. Go ahead. Politics.
I don't remember that.
I have a vague recollection that she stole somebody's bow, but yeah.
So this whole plot towards the end really starts to hinge on the plan of succession for the Emperor of Texas Six Direction, who is aging. And
he's quite ill with some sort of mystery illness.
Yeah. So his succession plan, as far as I understood it, which this is where I got confused. So if I get details wrong,
it's because the names are hard to keep track of a little bit, I find.
The names were hard to keep track of. And also I find that sometimes, and this is something I'll talk about as I go on, sometimes books with a lot of politics. If the politics don't seem to be tied to like the population and their needs and their desires and who's backing them, I find it very difficult to keep track of.
You like democratic, utopian?
Yeah. Well, it just starts to feel like these are just people fighting in like dinner parties, and I don't understand who I'm supposed to be rooting for, and I don't always understand like who is the bad guy, who isn't a bad guy, who is supporting them. And this is kind of where the politics went for me for quite a while. Was I was like, I'm not sure.
Which is maybe sort of the point, right? Because we're supposed to be, Mahit is our shorthand, right? She's our way into this. And so if she doesn't understand who she's rooting for, and it seems like other than like 3 Seagrass, she has no idea, then maybe that's the thing. But I totally get what you mean. In terms of being a reader, that can be really frustrating.
Yeah. So the plan of succession seems to be that there is a 90% clone named 8
something. Yeah.
Something is completely fine. And then there are 2 Iswazwakats, is what they're called, which are these really high, close to the emperor ministers. And these two ancestral cats are kind of in conflict with each other, basically over how they're going to control this kid, right? Or like
I think so.
who is going to be this like um caretaker, who's going to really hold the throne of power, because it can't be an 8-year-old child.
Yeah, 8 antidote. Sorry, there's 2 8s in here. That's
Yeah,
confusing. 10
so,
years old.
yeah,
So we're looking at like a regency, yeah.
yeah, exactly. And then added to that is this conflict 8 loop. Yeah, Joe's right. It is 8 loop.
See, okay, so hang on. In the back of the book, it says 8 antidote is a 90% clone of His Brilliance, the Emperor, one of 3 associated heirs to the Sun Spear throne, 10 years old. 8 loop is a minister of the judiciary. Kresh Sib to His Brilliance, one of 3 associated heirs.
Okay, yes.
Are there 2 8s? There's 2 8s and then that awful guy?
Yeah.
I thought we would have problems like pronouncing the names, but it turns out that this combination of numbers and nouns is actually really confusing to me.
Yes. Yeah, and he is the Kresh Sib, that was the term
Yeah.
used to me. So, and then added to this is this general who is like, doesn't have any battle victories to his name, but is kind of drumming up support amongst the population for a usurping of Sixth Direction.
Yeah.
Which sounds like it shouldn't be that complicated, but it is. Like, I had a really hard time keeping this together in my brain. And to be quite honest, I had a really hard time caring about it.
I remember asking in the Discord how emperors were chosen because it wasn't immediately clear, and then literally the question was answered like in the next section. Because all we knew about Sixth Direction at the time was that he was a ship's captain. So I assumed some sort of like military, like it was a, what's that called? It's like a meritocracy, but like a military meritocracy or something. But then it says, I wrote down the quote actually, emperors can ascend by congruence of blood, appointment by the previous emperor, or military acclamation. And it sounds like we have got kind of all 3 things happening here. We've got a clone, we've got a plan, like a will by the current sitting emperor, and then we have that side military conquest thing. And that discussion about somebody ascending to the throne who has no military experience is really interesting. Like, this feels very like ancient Rome to me.
See, yeah.
It's confusing.
I don't have a whole lot to say about the politics outside of the fact that I found it incredibly confusing and slightly difficult to really invest myself emotionally into as a reader, because I was like, I still don't know who I should have like emotionally supported, which, like, you're right, that is shorthand for the fact that he is this outsider. But
sure,
like,
but it's still frustrating
as a reader.
Yeah, and I think, I'm just reading Ron's comment here, the thing with the general reminded me of Rome when Southerners would go off to do military deeds, and there's a question of whether or not they would bring their army back to Rome. Totally, right? Like, that was a thing. You couldn't, when Julius Caesar crosses the river, right, and like brings his army too close to Rome and everybody loses their mind, right? Like, yeah, exactly, Elise, right? Like, that's a common theme. And then we haven't, again, we don't know enough about like the history of the empire to know if that's ever been a risk. It sounds like if you go off and have a great victory and you bring back all your battleships with you, that, you know, maybe there are super bloody. I think one of the things that, sorry, I'm all over the place here. One of the things the author said was that she wanted her civilization is based on like Aztec and Byzantine empires. And she wanted to pick empires that were super expansionist and viewed outsiders really poorly. But she wanted to replace that kind of Christian kind of ideology that underpins the Byzantine Empire with more of like a blood sacrifice kind of thing. And then she notes in the question in this interview that she did that like clearly in Teixcalani, the blood sacrifice portion is kind of like part of their glorious past, not really something they're doing currently. But then we see this classic like blood sacrifice that's kind of supposed to be the crisis point of the book, or like the climax of the book, where we're resolving all the stuff at the one time, right? With this massive kind of blood sacrifice. So yeah, it was an interesting thing where I agree. I wasn't like super emotionally involved in what happened. And I also wasn't super emotionally involved in like literally what happened. Do you know what I mean? Like when that sacrifice happens, I liked the scene setting of it. It didn't feel well. Yeah. And I like kind of the imagery of it all, but it didn't feel very I wasn't super upset about it. Like that was not the death in the book that I was like the most worried about or concerned about. And it felt very like, of course, that's who he's going to pick. Like the succession is now sorted out. Like the whole crux of our book here is that Iskander has promised this technology to the emperor to let him like live forever. And Mahit is like, whoa, like the emperor clearly does not understand what we mean here by living forever. Like it's like a bill of good, like the sale was bad, right? Like he wasn't really told what the technology really did.
Yeah. This person says pedal. That I was going to say that was the probably the most emotional I felt was when 12 Azalea. We're going to get super spoilery now.
Yep.
When 12 Azalea died, that for me was the most emotional. And like to be honest, I kind of saw it coming in the sense that I felt like one of these characters has to die, and I knew she wasn't going to kill off three direction because she wanted to have this. What's that the name? Not three direction.
Seagrass.
Three Seagrass, because obviously it was building into this romance, and like you could see that coming as a reader, and I just felt like there was no way she was going to kill off Three Seagrass, so I knew kind of that 12 Azalea was probably going to die. But I found that to be way more emotional than
Me too.
anything else in the whole book. Like all these life or death consequences and like empire building, empire destroying consequences, and for me it was 12 Seagrass because he was funny.
And I think the thing is, like, I could totally see it coming, and yet I felt shocked and a little bit like stunned for the next couple of pages after that death.
Him to come back, like I kept expecting, like, no, he really lived through that, like That's
yeah, that's funny how that like. I don't know. Can we talk, if now we're really into the spoilers here, can we talk about the romance?
Go. Didn't like it.
It just didn't feel earned. These people, they don't know each other, and it felt like I want all the queer romance ever. Like that's not. So in the early parts of the book, 6 helicopter, I was dying. I also wrote down, sorry, the 36 all-terrain tundra vehicle killed me. Like I wrote it down specifically. So in the early parts of the book, we as a group on Discord talked about how we felt like Mahit all of a sudden just trusts Three Seagrass, and we don't really understand why. And I think, some of us brought up the point where we were like, okay, well, if you're in this brand new world and your imago is crapping out on you and you have no choice, if somebody is kind of nice to you, you kind of have to make a calculated judgment. Like I've got to trust somebody and this is who it's going to be. Mm-hmm. And then we start going through all these like life and death scenarios, and all of a sudden they have this like moment that we have apparently been building towards, but not really. It's just like, yeah, we almost died a few times. Let's make out a little. Yeah. But I don't feel, and you know what? If that's what the scene was, like some sort of stress relief, like, oh my gosh, we're not dead yet, and we have this mutual attraction. One, that attraction sort of explains why she trusts Three Seagrass so much early on in the book. Like that's the piece that I think is actually building towards it. But I don't know, man. It wasn't earned.
I want to show Elise's comment because this is something that bothered me too, where she said that the romance felt a bit fetish.
Yes.
Into Barbarians, I kept expecting Mahit to be like, stop with that, or like have some conversation, trying to say, and like it just didn't happen. And I was like, I don't know how to feel about that because that was super uncomfortable for me.
Yeah, and I think, Mahit does sort of like shut it down by the end of it because she recognizes to some extent that like it's problematic. But I like Sabrina just said, I feel like we didn't know if Three Seagrass was going to betray Mahit until the last quarter, and then they just started making out like right? And I think it almost would have been more interesting. Like it's always more interesting when there's a betrayal. And I really like the betrayals in the gray zone where the character who's doing the betraying is not evil, but they have this like other agenda that we don't know about that is forcing them almost to do it.
And like the trope that I love and in complete trash for is the trope that's like, there's a double cross element, and then like, when I was asked to double cross you, I didn't expect to fall in love. Right. I love that trope. I'm complete shit for it. Okay, like I just love it.
No, and I don't mind it either, but
like that could have happened here, but like I just found it very difficult to believe that this was a world where there was so much political machinations and everybody working for their own ambition. But the two people who were placed closest to Mahit are just
Nice.
nice people who like her and don't really have any like skin in the game for themselves, except for like maybe working their way up through the ministries that they work for.
Sure.
I
Yeah,
found
I agree.
so difficult to like just so convenient. Even
Yeah,
though I liked, especially like I liked their characters, and I did love 12
me
Azalea.
too. They were
Like
like
I was
highlights of the
glad,
book.
yeah, I was
Yeah.
glad for their involvement, but I felt like even if like Three Seagrass had just like a little bit more like double crossing or just something else going on with her,
Another agenda, like
yeah,
nefarious or not. Like she's got to have, we know she
exactly.
comes from like an upper class, like she's a first patrician family, third patrician. She's somewhere up there, right? Like she is from a wealthy family. She's got a lot of education. Like I don't know, every show I've ever watched or any book I've ever read where there are people who are like the kingmakers behind the scenes, like the bureaucracy of a thing, that's where all the real interesting stuff happens. And you're right, of the two characters that Mahit really comes into contact with, like her friend characters, not like the people she happens to see, it's really disappointing that they were both just like nice and
Chill.
yeah.
And like their agenda was just like being genuinely helpful to her, which was their job, but like I don't know. I just like I expected something else to come of that didn't.
I
Uh,
agree. And I think we were set up, Mahit mentions it a couple of times where she's she's reflecting that she doesn't know if she should trust Three Seagrass, but
mhm.
who else is she going to trust? And like she doesn't know where anything stands, but then it all just kind of pans out. Like it would have been way more interesting had
Mhm.
it not just panned out.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Scrolling through the
I
comments.
know, me too. There's so many comments. Thank you guys for
Amy,
commenting.
yeah, they treated names like you would see like someone has truck nuts or something. That felt realistic. I agree. I think it was a funny moment, but it was also like it was a real good shorthand for telling you about the world, right? Where this is the way that people, this is like a vanity plate. Your name selection is like a vanity plate on your car
So
or
funny.
something. Yeah.
That's one of the funniest. Uh,
Uh,
I like
I
Hazel's
felt
comment.
betrayed that there wasn't a big
Wasn't a
betrayal. Yeah, I
That
agree.
was
I think
the
it would have,
real betrayal.
right. I wanted a plot twist.
I know. I
Nothing felt twisty.
no. And okay, speaking of things not feeling twisty, we're going to talk about like the gigantic Chekhov's gun in the book, which was
Yeah,
the fact
go.
that there was this Emiga machine in the dead body in the morgue that
That
we know.
everybody's kind of like around,
Yeah,
right?
like everyone's around it. Everyone knows it exists, and like
Mm-hmm.
uh, Mahit doesn't think that it's just been recording like decomposition and stuff like that all this time. Like,
Gross.
yeah, gross.
That body lasts forever.
Yeah. And like it's just so obvious as a reader that like this obviously is going to get implanted into me. Like this is the only reason for bringing it up. This is the only reason for having it in the story. It's the only reason why this thing is still around.
Yeah.
And it was just
Or
like
somebody. Like
yeah,
Mahita's the logical choice. A twist might have been it gets implanted into somebody else who
yeah.
doesn't really know what it does, and that could be hilarious.
And the
Continue.
plot in a lot of ways just felt like a slow march to that inevitable plot point
Yep.
when we were going to get that thing implanted in somebody and it was going to make the revelation about what Iskander had been up to for the past
Mm-hmm.
15 years.
Mm-hmm. And
So
even that didn't feel shocking. The revelation of what he had been up to
was
felt,
exactly what we thought he had been up to.
yeah, there was no like, because at first, again, the first like chapter, the first two chapters, we know that his death is untimely. Nobody's really saying that, but everybody's suspicious of that. And we're like, okay, so what's been going on here? Like, it
Mhm.
felt obvious.
Yeah, and then Ron brought up very convenient that 12 Azalea had the contacts to do it. Exactly.
Yep.
And that the contact was able to successfully implant it surgically.
Oh,
I
yeah.
thought what was going to happen and like what would have been cool was if she had to be awake during the whole time of surgery to direct the person how to implant it.
Right.
I
Yeah.
thought that would have been more intense and probably more
Oh,
believable
yeah.
because like how likely is it that you know
This state
Lascelles
secret.
yeah, the Lascelles is the only people that should know how to work this technology, but like some backyard surgeon
Yep.
like that for me was a little bit like
Yeah. Amy said I would read a book about Iskander, 19 ads in six direction for real. Like me too.
yeah.
I would love. I'm not often a fan of prequels. I find them typically unnecessary in a lot of ways, especially for like beloved series. I would read this prequel like gangbusters.
Me too. More comments.
Delightful Divine, Sabrina.
but what is going to happen to the old one? Dun, dun, dun. Oh no, that's true because the girl got to keep it. The one that did the surgery.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder what that is actually a good plot point because I do want to know what's going to happen to that in the next book. Like, this is the thing. I'm going to read the next book. Like,
Me too. I generally liked this.
I feel like
and
I'm
I will
being so negative right now, but like I did have a fun time reading this, and it held my attention the whole time, which is like the job of an author at the end of the day.
Yeah, and I think a lot of us commented too, like we were reading this in sections in a way that we maybe would not typically approach reading a book, where I felt like I wanted to be like with my notes and like wanted to be in a place where I could take notes whenever they came up because I'm using a library copy and I don't write in my books anyway. So I just felt like it was, I'm going to say homework and I don't really mean it like super negatively, but it was like I have to be in the right frame of mind. I have to be sitting like at my desk with my stuff. And it was just a different reading experience than just like curling up with a book and like busting through it.
And I do think in the beginning, and this is like personal, not like everyone's going to have this experience, I was really busy at the beginning of the
me
month.
too.
And so like I was reading like one chapter at like, at a time.
I went like 2 weeks without reading at all. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like one of those books that like is helped by a long reading session of just like continue. Cause like at the end of the day, I mean, like the plot takes place over 2 weeks. I probably took longer to read the book than the
book
events of the
took place.
book.
Yeah.
And it's a book that I think is helped by sitting down with it for a long period of time instead of just like stretching it out.
Yeah, like we were saying, like not getting the character development, not whatever. Like I think as readers sometimes forgot how compressed the timeline of the book was because many of us were taking a little bit longer to read it. So Sabrina said, I also wonder if Mahit felt like she was playing out an epic poem or romance, like out of literature or something, and maybe she got caught up in the fantasy. I agree.
Yeah, I completely agree about that. That was actually one of the aspects of the story I really enjoyed was all the little like sometimes you would get like little sections of dramas and stuff like that at the beginning of the chapter from Takes Blonde Literature.
Yeah,
I really enjoyed that as well.
I loved those beginning of the chapter things. Like there were a couple of moments in the book where it's info dumpy anyway, but I really liked it as a device in sci-fi in particular and fantasy sometimes to info dump about the world, like Robin Hobb does it phenomenally, right? Where you info dump about the world and give the reader context and information that they need, but you don't have to get some character just like up on a soapbox telling them the history of the whatever.
Yeah, I like that as well. And also the interludes in this book were well handled, and the writing
and needed
interludes were beautiful. It was
like always better. Yeah, there's this like omnipotent. It just like takes you out of the immediacy of like one person's perspective and gives you this like. Yeah, I agree. Sarah said, I felt like we needed Mahit to be betrayed or become jaded to balance the use of unreliable or naive narrator device. I agree. And I also feel like we've talked so much about how she comes to this planet and she is like shocked by the planet. She's like in this kind of mythical place for her where she's, spent her whole life learning about it and she finally gets there. I think talk about character development. Like how much development would that be for her to have like the same outcome overall to the story, but way more like betrayal and whatever twisty turns through the way. Because we're already talking about a super plotty book. It's not like we've already sacrificed some character development and some whatever to get here. So let's make the twists and turns like a little bit more, like set her up to be a different character in book 2. I feel like she's a very, very much the same character at the beginning of the book in book 1 that she's going to be in the beginning of book 2.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, she is the type of character that is just like a tabula rasa. Like you can just kind of project a lot onto her as a reader, which makes her sympathetic, but like maybe isn't the most well developed or lived in character.
Yep. Yeah, I know. I think he thought Iskander was just going to have one shipped. I love that idea. Like the Emperor is just going to like put in an Amazon order for a new Imago machine, and it's going to come through the jump gates eventually, and it'll be fine.
Yeah. Sorry, so many comments.
I'm so far behind on comments. Oh my gosh, I'm scrolling, guys. Yeah, he got sold. The picture on the Amazon page looked real good, but there was no product details. He was just like, "Oh, that looks great. I'm going to buy one."
Yeah.
She did get betrayed by her own peeps, though. At least, yeah. That was one of the interesting. Was that at the beginning of a chapter? Or was that an interlude? I forget. Where we get the scratch.
Yes, that was an interlude. That was I can't remember her name. It starts with an A, and it's really hard to pronounce.
And it ties back a
Hamaraba,
little bit to the prologue. Yeah.
who scratched the Imago machine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Immortal in different bodies. Yeah.
Yeah. I like Sarah brought out, she didn't get suspicious of others enough to give her the death. Felt like she was
Yeah.
grown up. And I wanted her to be. I agree.
And we know she's young, right? Like she's, and
I'd
we
say
know Iskander
mid-20s.
was young. Yeah. So we know like this is her first job. She gets picked for this ambassador role. And I think there's a couple comments made kind of specifically that she was maybe not an obvious choice in some ways, right? She's kind of like, they need an ambassador and like, now's the time, kid.
But she was chosen because of her compatibility with the Imago.
Yeah, which, I mean, helpful background information, I guess. It really, I left it in the Discord too for like anybody else that watches Star Trek. Like, there's a whole species in Star Trek called the Trill, and this is part of their culture. So not everybody gets a symbiote, but you go through this like intense training and screening process, and the people who get these symbiotes put in them, and they get like accumulated lifetimes of experience put in. And it's very much like there's like a class difference between people who qualify and people who don't, and that kind of thing. And this felt, as soon as I read it, I was like, again, talk about like sci-fi shorthand. I knew exactly what we were kind of getting ourselves into here. And I like it as a plot device. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I like the idea of ancestral memory. Like, it's not something that you see like a ton of. Like, Robin Hobb's books actually have a lot of details about ancestral memory, which I don't want to get into. It'll spoil things, but like, there's a lot about ancestral memory that like was kind of having fun, like drawing parallels with reading this one, because in Hobb's version of ancestral memory, they're kind of like the people who experience the ancestral memories, the creatures that experience them, I should say, get them kind of in these like waves, and like it's kind of just like this instinctual thing that's built into them. Whereas
Right.
this version of ancestral memory is almost like a personality that's talking to you, and that you can
Yes.
kind of like rely on, which I
Yeah.
kind of enjoyed as like a fun aspect of a reader thing, like more. And I actually wanted more. Like, it was almost
Me
like
too.
it was almost like bummed out that like Iskandir's Imago machine was failing her, because I wanted that conversation between her and 5-year
Yeah.
old Iskandir's Imago.
Yep, I agree entirely. And I like the way that they kind of explain the technology too, where Lascelles has this technology, and again, they're all eggs in that basket on it, but it's because that's the way they record like their history. Like, they have gotten, it sounds like they've gotten rid of a lot of the kind of ways we would think about recording history and whatever, and they've kind of devoted themselves to having this like almost living memory of things, which it was interesting to read.
So many comments.
I know. Elise says she wasn't clearly she either wasn't professional enough or not clumsy enough. I agree.
Yeah, they needed her to be young and naive to be set up for her own people, which I get, but I want her to grow more than she is a character. Yeah, I agree as well. Heidi says she's not that young though. She's 26. Oh, Heidi, you're calling me old. Just kidding.
I think I think back.
She's not like a teenager. You know what I mean? Like,
no, but she's in her first, like, I think back to, because I am a little bit older than that, but I finished my master's when I was like 22, and that was fairly young. And I started like my formal career when I was like 23, right? So by 26, I'm into like a full-time job and like actually getting going on things. And I would, especially with ambassadors, right? If we're looking at real world comparisons, right? Ambassadors tend to be a little more experienced. They have this like diplomatic like track record of success before they get assigned somewhere, and then they're going to get assigned to some crazy outpost before they make their way up to, like, if you're a Canadian ambassador, you're not getting sent to the US on gig one, you're getting sent to some island somewhere, right? That is less important until you get more experience.
Yeah, her first gig is the most powerful empire in the universe.
Yeah, that is threatening to take over your everything you know and love, right? Like,
and who you've not heard from your ambassador from for 15 years. So you're
like, this is a high pressure job
situation. So
this feels like a lot for 26 for me, but again, we're imposing our own kind of standards about age and all that kind of junk on it.
Oh, Heidi says, "Oh, sorry, I'm just teasing you. Don't worry, I know I'm old."
Joe's asking why they scratched the Imago machine to avoid the Imago technology to be given away by Iskander.
Where are we at?
I'm trying to remember back. Yeah, the sabotage element. Why was the Imago sabotaged? And I honestly don't remember.
Okay.
That's how clearly it stands out for me.
I think it was to avoid the Indigo technology being given away by Iskander.
Major stage. And Amy says, I read her being chosen as ambassador as all part of the sabotage. She was compatible, but maybe not the most or best for the role.
The Indigo manager, yeah. The Counselor for Heritage staged the sabotage.
Yeah.
We should read Foreigner by C.J. Sherry. This is something that
Oh,
because I have heard from multiple people, not multiple people, multiple sources online
yeah.
that C.J. Sherry was an influence
Yep.
for. I
Foreigner
own the first
specifically.
Foreigner book, and I
Of
haven't
course
read
you
it.
do.
Look, I've got a lot. Okay.
Put that on my gravestone. I own it, but I haven't read it yet. Amy, yeah, Amy. I thought her reasons for scratching were because she hated Texcalani culture and how LaSalle youths were being seduced. Yeah, there was definitely a moment where we talk about how like the culture has pervaded and all the young people now are reading like this is the classic like US empire comparison, right? Where everybody's wearing blue jeans and listening to rock music. And how they're starting to write poetry in the style of the empire and kind of forgetting the heritage of LaSalle Station. That is correct. Pretty weak. Yeah, I agree. The reasons for scratching were a little bit weak too. Like again, there's so much more. There could be so much more there, right? I would have read a book that was half set with Mahit and half set back on LaSalle Station. That would have given us a whole different perspective and way more information.
Or even if like it had like a flashback to LaSalle's Mahit's previous life. Going back to her past. Because like
Ron says not US ambassadors. No comment. No comment.
Sabrina says, I found it hard to believe that someone on LaSalle would be willing to destroy 15 generations of memory because of an emotional outburst due to a cultural disagreement. Yeah, I completely agree. There was just like
go ahead.
There was just like I mean, this is kind of like that criticism is kind of like a common theme where it was just like difficult to believe some of the impulsive decisions made.
Well, and I think it's partly because we don't get enough. Okay, so we're told that the stakes here are that LaSalle Station is going to get overrun by this expansionist empire, and they don't want to give up their freedom and the whatever. But we don't spend any time with a LaSalle character other than Mahit, and Mahit is like she doesn't count for that perspective because she's so enamored of the empire, right? So I think it's interesting having a character that can see the problems and see the threat, but also still really love it. Like, I think that's an interesting concept. And actually one of the other links that I will put in the Discord is a review that's titled Loving the Oppressor, Identity in a Memory Called Empire. And it's just like a book review written on Den of Geek. And it was that kind of thing too, where that's like an interesting construct. I liked it, but I don't get the, we talk about like an emotional outburst that destroys these 15 generations. Like, we don't know how long the empire has been a threat for. We don't really understand the relationship between LaSalle and the empire. Like, really, like, what are the logistics of this? Like, they're a mining collective. I assume they're economically tied, but I don't really know how they're different. Like, how did they get there and they're not part? I don't know. There's a lot of questions.
Yeah, there is a lot. Like LaSalle it's just not really developed. But I mean, a lot of it is set up for book 2, which for some reason, when we were talking about this book as a choice for this book club, I thought this was a standalone.
I thought it could have been as well. And I think after we chose it, I looked it up and was like, oh, hey.
Yeah, it's actually like got a sequel. But I didn't realize how much of a setup it would be for a sequel. But it's like a lot of a setup for a sequel. Like
tons.
The big threat in that void of space wasn't addressed hardly at all. Like we still
no, it's the teaser to book 2.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like The Expanse, right? I don't know if anybody else has read The Expanse series.
I have the first half of it, the first book.
I finished the first one, and we're building towards that too, but it's kind of that unseen threat kind of vibe that's coming. And I have not read past book 1, and I haven't watched the series, so I don't know. But like, it had kind of that vibe to me where it was like, get over all of your own internal crap because the like real threat's coming. Yeah, exactly, right? Because the real threat's coming.
Maybe this is like a book-long prologue. Yeah, it could be. That's what Billy says. Isn't that how Patrick Rothfuss always jokes about the first 2 books? He jokes around that he wrote like a 300,000 word prologue.
Yeah, and again, I don't mind. Like, I like the idea of I like authors generally who, like Robin Hobb actually, who writes dedicated series, but will spend a lot of time in a universe of their creation, right? Terry Brooks does it as a fantasy author. Like, I love the idea of getting all sorts of different stories that are either connected or loosely connected or not even at all connected set in this world, because I think there's so much here that I really liked and that we could explore still.
Oh, it's kind of like Becky Chambers does the same thing.
Yeah.
Only
Yeah.
maybe not as grand of a scale, but yeah.
Yeah. But still that same, somebody commented a long time ago now, I'm sorry, that they were surprised that it was marketed as a space opera. And I was like, yeah, because we spend no time in space.
Yeah, because I thought like the definition of a space opera, and maybe I'm wrong, is that
I don't even know. Yeah.
a significant portion of time. I only know because Thomas over at SFF 180, this is technically Space Opera September this month.
Oh,
and
right.
he did-
Yeah.
Yeah. He did a whole video about like space operas and what counts. And like, according to him, a significant portion of the book has to be about space travel.
Yeah. That feels legit to me.
It's
Like
not-
Battlestar Galactica is a space opera, right? Like, yeah, I don't know. Joe's asking, why did the Emperor adds in the science person ultimately kill Iskander?
Because they didn't want, my understanding of it was because they were still misunderstanding the idea of the Emperor living forever. And they didn't want the Emperor to do that to the kid. And they thought it was like grotesque. Because remember, they're all kind of like freaked out by the death culture in LaSalle.
Yeah, Elise is saying ads killed him to make sure the Emperor never gets the imago. Never reminded.
So many comments.
Sit with their feelings. Yes. Taught the counselors to sit with their feelings. You got to do that sometimes, right? Like I get emails at work and I'm like, you know what? Don't send a response just now. Just sit with your feelings and just.
All the time.
Yeah, book one prologue for sure. And that's the thing. Like I think we both like the book, and I think generally the Discord seemed to have mixed feelings, but there were a number of people who still enjoyed the book. It just, it feels like this is the very first introduction to what could be like, I could see this author writing in this universe for the rest of her writing career, which is super restrictive of me to say, but like there's so much here.
If she is that influenced by CJ Sherry, she might, because I mean there's like how many 400 books? Like
oh geez, I can't even.
There's a ton.
Yeah, I can't even with that.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I'm afraid
That's too much. I'm just looking at some of my notes here. Yeah, I was still like, I was really focused on the sci-fi elements of the book, or the lack thereof. Like it felt like there was one really specific element to it, and then the rest of it, I'm like, okay, but like, let's go on the ship. What does the ship look like? What, like, let's meet any other people. Like our cast of characters is actually really small. It feels very expansive, and you get this like glossary at the back or whatever that's explaining who all these people are. But really, our character group is really small for a book like this that feels like it should be vast.
Well, I would say the characters that we care about. The three.
Right.
3 Seagrass, the Mahit, and 12 Azalea.
Right. And then we've got maybe like 5 other characters around them that are important to the plot, but like we don't care.
Yeah. Heidi says that she thinks the space opera thing was when Anne Leckie talked about it as a space opera, because that's the big blurb on the book, is Anne Leckie calling it an all-around brilliant space opera. Amelia, and I mean,
I feel like Anne Leckie knows what she's talking about, but
hi, Amelia.
Hey, Amelia.
Yeah, because Anne Leckie wrote the ancillary novels, which are definitely space opera. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, that was a loud email notification.
Oh, I didn't hear it.
Okay, that's good.
Definition is a bit off. I agree. Yeah, I don't know. The ending felt like fine.
Yeah. Amy says, I feel like the marketers don't know what space opera is. It's just part of the blurb bingo now. Every SF book.
Oh, God.
Apparently a combination
book blurbs these days.
The Expanse and Game of
Thrones.
Always. It's always Game of Thrones set in, or such and such meets Game of Thrones.
Yep. And I hate that shorthand, because like the thing that's sad to me about Game of Thrones is that I started reading it, I don't know, 2004, 2005, like ages ago, right? Before the hype. Yeah, and Game of Thrones was revolutionary in a lot of ways. Like when you look at the sci-fi of like the 90s,
blew my mind.
Right? And then you look at Game of Thrones and you're like, oh, like your main character could die. Like I'm so used to like that classic fantasy trope of like, you get your band of characters together and nobody dies and they all make it through this life. Like Game of Thrones was revolutionary in so many ways. And then we look at how much has changed since then. And now Game of Thrones is like old hat, and we look at new fantasy and how revolutionary that feels. It's mean to them to be like,
And then putting like this new marketing and putting that old hat on it again and again and again when it's
Yeah.
really just not representative of it at all.
No, it does a disservice to like the book that you're trying to sell, and also I think to Game of Thrones. Opera forward. Operatic, I agree. Like I like the word for it. The world feels vast and it feels developed. Like it feels what is the word I'm trying to say? Like it's oh God, what it's like Lord of the Rings. There is a vast history and underpinning to a world. She just doesn't take the Tolkien approach of like proving it all.
Yeah, it feels lived in.
Yeah.
You feel
Yeah.
like, you feel like there's all this underneath the surface, that's supporting it.
But there's just a million more stories that we could tell here that we're not getting in this book, which again, it's not really the fault of the book.
Which you might get later on in later books, I mean, I don't know how much she plans to write in this world.
Yeah.
So I am going to be honest. I am pretty surprised this won the Hugo.
There was a comment in the Discord about what else was nominated and how it was a fairly strong year. I think that was the Hugo we were talking about.
I can't remember all of the Hugo. I'm going to look up who else was nominated for the Hugo this year because
there's like Harold the Ninth was on that list, which I tried to read and I did not get along with very well. I'm so sorry. I think that's going to be one of those books that people like. It's going to be a cult.
I think I listened to the first 5 minutes of it on audiobook and I was like, absolutely not.
I could not follow along what was happening. I'm so
sorry if people love that. Like, I'm not trying to throw shade. It was just not for me.
Okay. Oh, Heidi, I'm glad you're having a good time and having a good discussion with everybody. We weren't sure how it was going to go the first time, right? Like, just like making notes and whatever. Elise says, I wasn't super impressed with any of the Hugo nominees. There's another one that, like, a name that I really recognized. Do you have the list, Chris?
I'm trying to pull it up, and of course.
Sorry if you guys can hear typing. Was this the 2019 or 2020 Hugo winner? Oh, my knowledge of reports. Holy crap. Oh, Middle Game.
Okay, yeah. So it was The City in the Middle of the Night was nominated by Charlie Jane Anders, Gideon the Night by Tamsin Muir, The Blight Brigade by Cameron Hurley, Middle Game by Shannon McGuire, and The 10,000 Doors of January by Alex Harrow, which I know you read, didn't you?
I did, and I liked it. And then, I would say I really loved the first like half or 2/3 or something, and the ending got a little bit too heartfelt for me.
Amelin asks, is the Hugo an award just for sci-fi? No, it is for science fiction and fantasy. It tends to go more often to science fiction than it does fantasy. Like if you compile the data, the winners are way more likely to be science fiction. And the other thing about the Hugo Awards, which is that I find, as I've like tried to read the books over the years and see what I think of them, and gone through the list, is that it tends to reward idea-focused novels over character-driven novels. And I think that's because it's trying to reward like innovative
I agree.
Works in the genre.
And I think this is like I think this book is really successful at a lot of things, right? Like having this historical based empire in space, like we've sort of seen it before, but this definitely felt new to me in a lot of ways. Like, so of that list, I've only read The 10,000 Doors of January, and I would not say that that is like a winner of anything.
I haven't read any of them. I'm trash, except for Gideon the Ninth. I tried, but it wasn't me.
Yeah, same. Tried Gideon the Ninth. Cameron Hurley, I've heard so many good things about. Charlie Jane Anders, I read the previous book out.
All the Birds in the Sky.
Yeah, and I was mixed on that. And then Middle Game, I've heard a lot of people talk about, but I have not read myself. So yeah, it's hard. It's hard with these to say, right? Like, should it have won the Hugo? I don't know. Haven't read enough of them.
What to say of the Hugo Awards, of the nominees this year for the Hugo? 4 out of the 6 were published by Tor.
I saw that, which I mean, I kind of expect with Tor, but yeah. A book of short stories in this world could be interesting. Yeah, and she mentions, did I say that out loud? I can't remember. That she says, I hope I can get to write a novella about 19 ads and maybe some other books set in Texclan. It's not a series exactly of the universe. Me too.
I would read all about 19 ads and all her like little minions working out of her apartment with her.
Right. I want like a super bureaucratic, like mundane. I would read the heck out of short stories like that. World Fantasy Awards is just for fantasy. Yes, I'm terrible actually with genre awards.
my favorite award is the Locust. I love
Okay.
following the Locust Awards for science fiction and fantasy because I think they're like a good like cross like they they are innovative books that win typically, but they also tend to reward just like good storytelling, good character
Okay.
development. I like
I'm not a big award person, but the awards that I do sort of pay attention to are all very literary fiction oriented. I'm really not great at the genre stuff.
Maps all grown up. I would read that.
Oh yeah, Bomb the Raven Tower didn't go up, and then Total Sense after the fact when Lucky said she didn't accept the nomination. Spicy indeed.
I read the Raven Tower. I was, to be honest, not a huge fan, but I've heard that her science fiction's better. So
Which means I may love it because we actually have very different
complete
opinions on a lot of
opposite
things. Yeah.
fantasy.
Yeah. Which is, it's funny. I think, and it's funny starting this book club with science fiction, and we talked about how the book club is meant to like get people to read genres they maybe typically don't. And like you've got the support group and the whatever. I read a lot of sci-fi. And actually see, and the genres we picked for this year, I would say are ones that I have like read more regularly. Like we're going to do a fantasy, we're going to do some nonfiction, which will be a reread. A historical fiction is totally my jam. I am going to be 100% honest that I am not super pushing myself with these early picks, but I think some other people really are. So that's interesting.
Yeah, sci-fi I don't read a ton of. I feel like I don't know. I guess like I think a lot of like if you gravitate towards science fiction or if you gravitate towards fantasy is sometimes like dictated by like what is in your pop cultural repertoire of
Yep.
like nostalgia. Because like
Yep.
for me growing up, the pop culture repertoire was Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter.
Right.
They're all fantasy, and it's no surprise I've become like I'm a gigantic fantasy nerd, and I hardly ever reach for science fiction because I didn't grow
See, and
up
I'm like
really
a little
reading Star
older than
Wars or
you,
Star Trek or anything
and
like
I
that.
watched Star Trek like crazy growing up. Yeah, and like I am that person. I hated Harry Potter. I read the first Harry Potter when it came out. I tried to, and I
Boo.
DNF'd,
Actually, I
and I
should be
never
saying
went back to it until I worked in libraries, and I was like, I should read Harry Potter. And now I like it, but I don't have that same like connection that everybody else does. But like,
it's just nostalgia at this point for me.
same with me with Star Trek, and like, there's 50 years of history in that show that again talk about shorthands.
Yeah. Read more comments. Lee says literary fiction is my weakness. See, this is the thing. Like, I've been wanting to try and put in like literary fiction as one of our picks, but like, I don't know
Yeah,
how to because like, what is literary
how?
fiction? What is that as a genre? Like, how do you define that? I mean, like, I guess like you could point to like Sally Rooney and all these people,
Sure.
and like, yeah, it's definitely lit fic, but like, I mean, it almost goes back to like that one like definition of pornography where it's like you
You
can't
know it
define
when you
it, but you
see
know
it.
when you
Yeah.
see it
Yeah.
exactly.
I agree. Chris and I, like, I think we do put quite a bit of thought into the picks that we have. We have like some criteria in mind, and literary fiction feels really hard. Like we have picked space opera maybe as like our sci-fi pick, and there's a lot of other science fiction that we could pick, and the same with fantasy and historical fiction feels the same. Like what kind of historical fiction? And it gives us a lot of room to pick different kinds of books as we go forward. But literary fiction feels so hard.
It's so hard for me. And like I don't know. I guess like I'm somebody that reads like 50% literary fiction and 50%
Yeah.
fantasy.
Yeah.
And so yeah.
Interesting. Lucky was being too nice. She wanted others to have a turn. I just read about Lucky's withdrawal and respect the heck out of it.
Yeah, she seems like a really nice person. I've watched a lot of interviews with her. She's super
I'm
chill.
really bad at that. I never watch like author interviews or anything.
I'm obsessed with them. They're just, like,
I kind of wish
constantly
I
on in the
was.
background.
Raven Tower's
Amen.
extra great if you like Hamlet. I do love Hamlet.
Never read it. I've only
What?
I've pretended to read Shakespeare in high school.
Chris! I love Shakespeare so much. Hamlet is phenomenal.
Maybe one of these days. I like I wrote a whole paper on like the roles of women in Elizabethan England through the lens of Othello. It was a 20-page paper. I read not a single word of Othello.
That hurts my heart, Chris. Amazing. We got a couple people. I would not have picked up this book if not for book club.
Yeah,
I had just started reading fantasy since COVID started.
That was what I was going to mention. Like my fantasy reading has like exploded since COVID. Like
Since
it is
COVID.
like, and I'm sure it's probably just like that typical thing of I want escape, but it's also just like the world is so bad. Like even when awful things are happening in a fantasy book, like it's happening in their world. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like,
You don't have to worry about it.
and there's almost like a sick, like voyeuristic glee from watching something terrible happen in a world that you just can't experience. Like,
Yep. It's fine if it's over
yeah,
there.
exactly.
But like I read a few pandemic novels. Like I read Severance this year and I read Afterland, and I was both whew.
My sister and I, my sister lives in Tennessee. We started a quarantine siblings book club at the beginning of the
That's
pandemic.
adorable. I love that so much.
We haven't kept it up. We did like 5,
Oh no.
but we've gotten busy. But our first pick, we decided to like really lean in, and this was back in like March or April when the pandemic just first started like really blowing up. We did Station 11, and
Chris.
I know
It's like the classic don't read this during a pandemic book.
And like what's so great about Station 11 though was that like at first I thought it was gonna be really hard to read, upsetting because like the guy like after he sees the play and he gets a phone call from his friend that's like this pandemic's starting, you need to like hunker down. He goes to the grocery store and he starts stocking up on toilet paper. And I had just stocked up on toilet paper, like, and I was reading that and
Too real.
I was like Lauryn Hill strumming my pain with his fingers. Okay.
What a great callback. We did not hoard toilet paper. We were not those people. I had enough toilet paper.
I did get 3 packages of it because it was out everywhere. Like it was out at Walmart, it was out
everywhere.
Club, and like I went to Target and there was like single ply, disgusting off-brand toilet paper in this corner. And I saw it and I was like, I'm getting 3 packages of this thing because like I'm almost out of shit paper.
Oh my gosh. I was like, if this is the end of days, like toilet paper is going to be the least of my concerns. Let's go buy some beans and rice. That's hilarious. I am now terrified to learn too much about the authors. Yeah, I'm going back through the chat. I do find it interesting to hear you talk about how the genre changed over time. I started reading. So one of the recommendations I had from one of my like real life friends, not my internet friends, is talking about like how the book club should read classics of the genre. And I think, you know, there's a lot that we could do there, right? We could read one of the first fantasy books ever written and compare it. But I think you almost want to have, if you've read no fantasy ever, going back and reading kind of a harder classic could be a little bit challenging. So something to kind of keep in our back pocket. But I like the idea of kind of looking at genre through time because it is different. And I agree that like YA was not a genre. Like when I was growing up, there was like one shelf at the library that was like older kids books, but not an adult book.
Sabrina says she gifted my partner's brother Station 11 and Severance for Christmas last year. Whoops. I think you might have like, that was like the butterfly effect.
Yeah, you did it.
You did it.
I was one of those readers. I think I said on my channel a couple of times, like I didn't actually mind reading pandemic books. It didn't make it worse. There was a real moment in Severance, kind of like in chapter 1 or chapter 2, she gets an N95 mask delivered to her at work. And I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be too much for some people. It didn't really bother me, but... Yeah.
Well, with Station 11, what was nice was like the actual like mechanism of the pandemic. Like it killed like 99% of the people within like a month. Like it was so ridiculous.
You're barren. It's not about that.
Exactly. Like yeah. It's more about what I liked about Station 11 was that like you had like pre-world and post-world, and like the mechanisms for how you got there wasn't important. It was just that these people now have to deal with this post-apocalyptic society, which did make it an easier read. Like if it had spent a lot of time focusing on like the hospitals and the people being sick and stuff like that, like I think I would have had like a difficult time with that, but it really wasn't that.
Sabrina, I'm sorry that we blamed COVID on you just now.
I don't mean it.
I don't mean it. That's funny. Amy, your parents got so much toilet paper.
Yeah.
I just remember it was like on the news. It was everywhere. It was like people walking out, and they would interview people walking out of the store with like a cart full of toilet paper, and they'd be like, "So what are you stocking up for?" And there was like one guy who's like, "I don't know. Everybody else is buying it." It's like,
well, it was kind of like, I mean, I don't live in a very big city, and so like, there's not like a ton of grocery stores.
No, I live in a small town.
Yeah. So like, the idea of like, it was out everywhere. I mean, like, it wasn't at Aldi, it wasn't anywhere. I was just like freaking out when I saw that. When I saw the supply at Target, I was like, and they were price gouging. $15 for a package of 6 single-ply shipping.
That's American. 15 American. I have to do the conversion in my head.
A lot.
It's a lot of money. That's so funny. I love. Okay, first live show has ended in a discussion about the run on toilet paper.
Oh my gosh. Should we
so maybe, guys, we're probably going to wrap it up in a few minutes here. Oh, Elise, I'm so sorry you ran out.
Oh
That's
no!
really unfortunate. We never ran out, and I would have used something else. Like there's like I don't know, paper towel or whatever.
Anyone who
Anyway,
bought a bidet before the pandemic, they're just
oh,
laughing at us.
and this was a reminder to me that I was like, I need a bidet in my house. Like I have wanted one for a while. There's lots of studies about how much more sanitary they are, and I just haven't gotten around to it.
It's like a dream of mine.
I know, right? I want like the heated water. See, now we're talking about poop.
Oh my gosh, we need to
guys.
stop. We're done.
Okay, guys, the next book. I have my copy here of Paragon Hotel by Lindsay Fay. This is our October pick. I have broken it out like I did. You can barely see. I'm really particular about how I put Post-it notes and things. I'm a monster. I broke it out like we did for the September pick. So there's 4 sections of the book. I will be adding those channels to the Discord on like Wednesday night, which is the last day of the month, so that we don't start like super early, but you know it's up and available for everybody. And yeah, I don't know what our live show date will be, Chris. I was looking at the calendar, and I think we might do November 1st for this one if we're sticking with Sundays.
I like Sundays.
Yeah, Sundays I think works. It's just easier with time zones. Like I think a lot of people are in North America. But we do have some people definitely in like the UK and the rest of Europe. So like doing it this time kind of hits the most time zones, I think, for us. I'm eating dinner. Please no bidet talk. I'm so sorry, Amy. I'm so sorry. Let us know though, like in Discord or whatever, if there's things about the way the setup is working or the timing and stuff that, you know, like you have suggestions for. We're always happy for suggestions. But we're trying to just keep it as manageable as possible at the beginning. But I've just been, I've said it a couple times on my channel this month, I've been so excited about the group and about Discord and like how great that's been. Like really good discussions and really fun things too. Like thanks to whoever, I forget who posted the Find Your Tixkalani name. That was
so much fun.
21 Spatula. I saw you come into this chat and I think we were talking about something and I never went back, but like amazing. Amazing. Oh, there's somebody in Discord right now. Yes, Sunday is perfect for next live show. Okay, so probably we will do something very similar to this.
Awesome. This time.
Awesome.
Awesome. I think this is a great time. I had a good time for the first podcast. Thanks for putting up with like all the like figuring out the chat stuff like that.
Figuring out the chat and the whatever.
But brand new for us. I've never done a live show on YouTube before, so.
Me either. And we tested StreamYard for like 2 hours on Friday night where we just talked about random stuff. But then we had never actually pushed it live. So yeah.
I'm glad it
awesome.
Worked. Awesome.
All right. Thanks everybody.
Being so great in the chat. I really appreciate it. And yeah, looking forward to next month.
We'll talk to you in Discord.
Yep.
Bye.
Bye.